Hey, welcome back to the Ready State. I want to follow up on a conversation we had a few weeks ago, really talking about how we were challenging positions. So as we advance this conversation, we can be very clear that ultimately the thing we care about is movement, and the roots of movement are about position. So when we end up defining mobility, we're saying, do I have the range of motion, the raw biomechanics to be able to express this for whatever reason, and do I have the control to be able to express effective shapes? And together we define those as mobility. So it's important that we remind you that we have all of these ways and additional ways to challenge position. And ultimately, if we add load and speed, and I was breathing hard and had to do more than one rep, and I was competing and I had to change my shapes and organization, I couldn't just do one rep times 1,000 in practice, that ends up being and representing the complexity of human movement. In fact, it probably looks like sport or skiing or some kind of actual activity that we're doing. So what we've done is sometimes we have taken the roots out of strength conditioning and we've made it complex, but ultimately we're trying to replicate the demands of real human movement by controlling for these variables. And our hypothesis is that athletes who can maintain the benchmarks, the bookmarks, the bookends of position under these conditions end up being really, really capable when they want to learn and pick up new sports or where they want to go out and express those positions in the world. So part of the magic of being a coach then is to identify when our athletes are lacking the ability to engage in these fundamental positional shape challenges. So ultimately what I'm talking about is, do I have the language in my strength and conditioning practice, in my coaching practice, in my interoception, my ability to feel where I am in space, to identify compensation. And the idea here is that that compensation is really shorthand for saying, look, we agree that you're going to complete a novel task any way you can. If I say, hey, I need you to get your hip crease below the knee, you're going to get that done for me no matter what. If we're throwing a ball or catching, and our bodies will solve that problem mechanically. The issue is that there are positions in which I'm able to maintain the capacities of my body and stability and upregulation of function of my body, and there are positions where my body will just solve that problem for me, right? And that is really where the lines of compensation start. So clearly you can collapse your arch and have your knee slam in and impinge your hip and jump very effectively there, but maybe that's not the best position to cut, land, jump, generate more force, and it may not be very sustainable over 20 or 30, 40 years. So the idea is, hey, can I spot compensation? And really the idea here is that when I see athletes moving around a problem as a coach, I become curious because those movement solutions are novel and they may or may not ever cause pain, but in the language of human function, it becomes really clear about the shapes that transfer to better learning, transfer to less pattern interference from other movements, and better outcomes. So it's really our ability to spot compensation that's really the hallmark of our profession. So key here is, how much range of motion do I need? Now, all of the textbooks have given us clues about what the American Academy of Orthopedic Surgeons thinks is full range of motion, the American Academy of family practitioners, what the physical therapists think through Norkin and White. And basically, they've looked at lots and lots of people and said most people should be able to do this. Full range of motion is expressing with an externally rotated position all the way up with the arm. That's what we're calling normative or full range of motion. That I should be able to have with my ankle knee bent 20 to 30 degrees of dorsiflexion. And people may disagree a little bit about that in terms of range of motion, but really it's about sort of managing of degree, not kind, right? So maybe everyone has a slightly different take on a few degrees, but ultimately everyone's going to say, yeah, 120 degrees of hip flexion is what we should expect in the distribution of a population. Which means when I'm far off from that, I may or may not have a problem, I may or may not be a world champion already, but it can tell me about lost capacity or lost function. Now the key here is, as I'm working alongside of athletes in the context of their sports and performance, not every one of my athletes may need full range of motion to do their sport. If I'm an Olympic sprinter, for example, that we've used before, I do not need excessive amounts of dorsiflexion to go fast. What I need is enough dorsiflexion that I do not compensate. So what does compensation look like? Does the foot turn out? Does the arch collapse? Does the knee in a valgus position? Have we lost efficiency and leverage and mechanics? And so if I round my back when I get into the scrum, or I've reversed as I set up to be able to be in an athletic position, that may or may not ever really cause me a problem. But what I see is, hey, that's a solution to a motor problem that may not transfer better to effective training or may not leave me with the most movement options. And so the key here is for me to be able to ultimately identify in real sport in real time what I think compensated positions look like. Then I go back to the gym when I can control for all the variables and begin to get back to, well, does this athlete, are they able to hip hinge? Are they able to squat effectively and hinge in a long lever or short lever leg position? And now I can begin to ask the question, do my athletes have the raw materials to be able to go express movements at real time, real speed with less compensation? And it turns out that this is sometimes very difficult to do at high speeds. Our athletes are powerful and there's a lot of complexity going on. So what I can absolutely control, and I'll tell you our masters are really good at this, but what I can absolutely control is this range of motion in the gym. So how much range of motion do my athletes need? They need enough range of motion to complete the skills that I'm asking them to do without compensation, right? Do these skills transfer? Can I take a full breath in that position? And what we'll find is that strength and conditioning, modern strength and conditioning particularly, is a harsh mistress. It demands full range of motion and control in that range of motion through lots of planes of motion. And those basic planes of motion end up being push-up, bench press, pull-up, squat, dip, hinge, handstand, kettlebell swing. You'll see that ultimately the language and tools of strength conditioning are not the magic. The challenging to the positions, the challenge to the positions that we're trying to remedy under all of those conditions are the magic. So how much range of motion do I need? Well, can my athletes not compensate in the gym? Because if they don't compensate in the gym, they're less likely to compensate here. How much of range of motion do I need? I need enough range of motion that my athletes do not compensate. During sports preparation phases, we can really chase that. During sport-specific training, we keep an eye on minimums. How do I know my athletes are not compensating? Well, I'm watching them run and jump and cut and land and throw, and they're completing the work without compensation so that I'm not at odds with these two things. So as you're functioning, you're working through this for yourself, and you're noodling, more is not always better, enough is better, and more importantly, getting to the bottom of the conversation around when do I do it? Well, I just ran a test, it's called strength and conditioning, that tells me everything I need to know about how my athletes are moving, so ultimately they can create robust systems so they can go express it.